We tried something different and it didn't work. That's how I saw the Monaco Grand Prix, a race which seems to have divided opinion, but on the whole hasn't gone down too well with the fans, the teams or the drivers. Carlos Sainz called it manipulation, Alex Albon said it wasn't pretty, James Vowles said it's not how I like to go racing, where he even apologised on text to Toto Wolff for his team's tactics during the race. It was an experiment to see if making the drivers pit twice would actually sort of spice up the action for the Monaco Grand Prix, but all it did was really cause chaos and expose flaws in these new rules. So all in all, it was a disaster for Formula One. So where did it go wrong? Well, I say disaster, but believe it or not, there actually were some positives to take away from the weekend. The first one was really the intrigue going into the race. How were the teams going to play their strategy depending on where they qualified on the grid? There were so many options that they could choose from as to when they could pit, and yet there were so many factors at play that could jeopardise which strategy that they would choose for the race. Even Pirelli were scratching their heads. They had no idea as to what would be the ideal strategy for the teams to choose. That's how open it was going into the Grand Prix, and that's how much intrigue there was. And it really did create some real intrigue. No one knew when or where was the best time to pit to ultimately maximise their chances of getting the best result possible for the team. Another positive, I guess you can kind of claw from it, I suppose, is that it did create a better spectacle than last year. But 2024 Monaco Grand Prix, I think we can all agree, that's as dull a race as you're ever going to get. But how much better was it? Well, that's an entirely different question, isn't it? And this for me is really where the positives stop and the negatives begin to take centre stage. If you look at how the race panned out, Lando obviously led away from pole position ahead of Leclerc, Piastri and Verstappen, and all four of them would finish the race where they would start, even if each of them did lead a lap at some point, but that was really only because one of them would then dive into the pits to make one of their mandatory pit stops. The expectation or hope was that these new rules would ultimately create more action, more jeopardy, force the drivers to drive faster and not preserve their tyres so they could try and make it to the end, and also mix up the order. But in fact, apart from Hamilton jumping ahead of Hadjar and the rest of the top 10 moving up a position because of Alonso's retirement, the top 10 was largely unchanged from when the race started. But in saying that, that's not uncommon for Monaco. But the fact that this was supposed to change the order, almost as if it was promised, is why I felt so disappointed and deflated from what we saw on track. I mean, it did absolutely nothing for overtaking. In fact, on the main broadcast, I don't remember seeing an overtake after the first lap. But that's a whole separate issue that is down to really other factors, which I'll speak about more later in the video. This for me was more show than a sporting spectacle. I mean, the FIA and Formula One, they came together trying to look at ways that they could improve Monaco, try and improve the race and the spectacle. And when they presented these options to the teams, this was what everyone agreed was the best solution. And kind of when you look at it now, this was really a knee-jerk reaction to the Ballfest of 2024. Just to prove how knee-jerk this new rule was, it soon became clear as the race was unfolding that the teams was now starting to play games, and they actually exposed a clear loophole in these new rules, because Racing Bulls and then Williams effectively sacrificed one of their drivers to hold up the cars behind so that the lead driver could pull away, make enough of a gap so that they could come into the pits, make one of their mandatory stops and still come out in front of the pack. So Lawson initially did this for Hadjar, and then at Williams both drivers actually helped each other. Sainz did it for Albon, and then Albon returned the favour when Sainz had to make his two stops. And when you've got cars going considerably slower than they were in qualifying, some of them between sort of 4 to 9 seconds slower, that's not racing, that's just farcical. And you know what, I'm not even going to blame VCarb or Williams, because they had absolutely every right to do what they did. And at the end of the day, they nailed it. They got it absolutely spot on. They got both of their cars in the points by the end of the race. So fair play to them. And maybe it was a blessing that they did this, because now we know where the flaws lie in these new rules. On the flip side, other teams got it completely wrong, especially Mercedes, who I'm really surprised waited so long to react, to not pit one of their drivers sooner. It just made complete sense that they would make one of their drivers get out of the train that they were in to make one of their mandatory stops, but they just waited and waited. And by then they were completely caught out and soon realised that effectively their race was run, it was over. And then you had Russell cutting the chicane just to get ahead of Albon because he was frustrated at being held up behind him and he had nowhere to pass him. So he seemed quite happy to clearly gain an advantage and take what was an inevitable penalty just so we could have some clear air. Another problem that we had was the massive spread between the cars up and down the field, which we really don't see to that extreme, even in Monaco. Apart from the top three who finished within 7 seconds of each other, you had Hamilton in P5 finishing over 50 seconds behind Verstappen ahead of him, and then he was a whole lap ahead of Hadjar in P6, and then Albon in P9 all the way down to P17 were a whole 2 laps down on the leaders. So it wasn't a great look seeing so much disparity up and down the order. I'm also not sure that having Red Bull keep Verstappen out as long as possible before making his second stop was great for the integrity of the race. Again, I don't blame Red Bull for doing this. Anyone else would have done it in their position. They were clearly waiting for a potential safety car or red flag that could bring Max into play. If there had been a red flag late on that would have handed Max the victory, that for me would have been a step too far in regards to why these rules were brought in the first place and how they were supposed to work. It would have been a bit of an egg on the face moment for Formula One. It's going to be interesting to see how Formula One reacts to this, and if it does intend to keep the 2-stop rule for Monaco again next year, how it's going to make improvements. There were some small signs of potential, but it is essential that some tweaks are made for next year if it is to work. But what should be done? I think one solution that maybe wouldn't have quite the impact that maybe we'd hope it would be to mandate when the teams have to make their first and second stops. So giving them a specific lap when they have to pit by, which could maybe prevent them from using one of their drivers as a blockade. I'd also have tyres that are specifically for Monaco that effectively forces the teams to make more stops, because the tyres that Pirelli always bring to a circuit like Monaco are too durable. They need to make them soft enough that the drivers can push on them, but eventually they hit a cliff. We have to remember that these rules were brought in because of last season's snooze fest, which was fair enough. But the real problem with 2024 was actually that stupid rule that allows drivers to change their tyres under a red flag, which meant all of them fitted the hardest tyre available that could complete the whole race. That was where the real problem lied. Monaco has almost become universally hated in recent years because of the lack of racing that we tend to get there, but the circuit is not the problem. You can't blame the circuit because it's barely changed since 1950. It's the cars. They have become too big and have outgrown Monaco. Monaco hasn't got any bigger. So that's where the real issue lies. The cars are obviously going to be getting a little bit smaller in 2026, but how much of a difference that will make, I doubt very much, which is sad because if the problems do remain again next year, that could be the final nail in the coffin that confirms that maybe Monaco has got to be scrapped. I've always loved this race because it's unique, it has so much history, but I don't like seeing everybody turn their back on it. It's really sad to see. I'm all for Formula One trying something different to almost re-energise Monaco, but let's be clear, this wasn't a race, it was a 78 lap gimmick. So it's going to be interesting to see where Formula One turns next, because if they get it wrong, Monaco's future could really be at stake. Well, there you go guys, that's it for today's video. Be sure to let me know your thoughts on the Monaco Grand Prix in the comment section. What did you make of it? Did you find it farcical? What changes would you make to improve it if it does stay for next year? Also, if you are new around here, don't forget to like the video and do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.